Given everything happening in the world, people perceive it to be this courageous thing to transition. But trans people are simply aligning themselves with their humanity. That's what all of us should be doing. And you don't have to be transgender or gay or lesbian or whatever. Whatever it is that's blocking you from your own inner truth needs to be overcome, not only for yourself, but for the benefit of others. And that's where I think, your liberation affects the liberation of your community.
What do you really know about people who are born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm one of your hosts, Lynn Murphy. The other host, Wendy Cole, is a woman who transitioned when she was 67 years old. I'm the founder of Women Who Push the Limits, and Wendy is a coach and helps people navigate significant changes in their lives. So our podcast, well, we've been told that it's unique or unusual, but we bring together the cisgender woman and a transgender woman to have some honest conversations, share perspectives, authentic journeys of real people to try and change the minds and the hearts and the perspectives of people in the world today who are bombarded with disinformation and misinformation about what the transgender journey is really like. So our goal is to educate, inspire, and humanize the transgender experience by sharing the voices of people who were born transgender, their friends and family members, co-workers, healthcare workers, and other allies who support their journey. And today, we are so grateful to have a fascinating guest with us. Stevie Inghram is a queer and trans femme who is the podcast host of Queer Storytime, the podcast, available across all major podcast platforms and YouTube. Professionally, as a soon-to-be naturopathic physician and current yoga and Ayurvedic therapist, Stevie's work integrates science, spirituality, and holistic medicine with queer and trans advocacy. Ultimately, her goal is not only to help queer and trans individuals optimize their overall health and well-being, but to provide them with practical and sustainable tools to enhance well-being and vitality throughout their lifespan. Beyond her clinical work and podcasts, Stevie also serves as a consultant to holistic healthcare professionals and institutions seeking to elevate their knowledge of queer and trans healthcare, all while learning the skills necessary to provide holistic LGBTQIA+ affirming care. Stevie, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we already introduced you as a soon-to-be naturopathic physician. So why don't you start by talking about your career a little bit and where you're at with your schooling, and then we'll get into a little more of your past life.
Yes, I am about 8 or 9 months from graduating what will be a 6.5-year journey in medical school. So I'm so excited. I can feel relief as I speak those words. So I came into studying naturopathic medicine through earlier work as a yoga therapist. I'm still a yoga therapist, but first of all, in my undergrad, I was a music major. Didn't think that I could be a healthcare professional because of how challenging I knew that going into medicine was. Well, I blew that out the window because, as I just said, I'm 8 months from graduating. And, in my work as a yoga therapist, I was working with people with complex psychological and physiological medical conditions. And whereas I think yoga therapy and Ayurveda can be two very, very powerful tools in terms of offering mind-body integration and healing and transformation, I just wanted a lot more medical knowledge. And boy, did I get that.
6.5 years at that.
Oh, literally. So yeah, I'm super excited to graduate very soon.
So you're in your mid-30s now, graduating from medical school. Tell us a little bit about growing up. What was it like? And I know you talked about being a pastor's kid.
Yes, I'm a Christian pastor's kid
in Pennsylvania.
in Pennsylvania. I was born in Pittsburgh. My father is a United Methodist minister of, I think, over 30 years. So he's been doing this pretty much as long as I've been alive, if not longer. Maybe going on 40 years now that I think about it. So he is soon to be retiring, but yes, as people listening can probably imagine, my life was not easy growing up as a Christian pastor's kid and, being male presenting, but having more female mannerisms at the time. That was always a convoluted thing in my brain. What is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So, as I'm sure Wendy can understand.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I, went about my life presenting as male for over 30 years and just identifying as a gay man throughout the majority of my life. And as much as I love gay men and I think gay men are great, that there was something about that identity that just, it was questionable because even when I was in relationships with gay men, I wanted to be in more of a feminine role, but I was expected to be, in like a masculine role. And it just never sat right for me. And I know, Wendy, in your relationships, you felt that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So navigating all of that was difficult, and it certainly was challenging growing up in the church, even being accepted as a gay male at the time, which, that was never pleasant.
And this was the Methodist church too,
This
right?
was the Methodist church.
I grew up in the Methodist church. The minister's son was one of my friends.
It's amazing. Yeah.
One Sunday morning, our mutual friend Bill had Playboy and opened it up to the centerfold where all the congregation could see because we were in front.
Oh,
You can imagine how well that went over.
So did your family accept you as a gay teen or gay young person?
Well, this is a story that I think is interesting because I was forced out when I was not ready. I was in high school at the time, and I think it was like junior year prom. And, went to prom. I had a female date at the time, and a group of friends and I were planning on staying at my friend's house. And my parents wouldn't let me because there was going to be boys and girls there. So I went home, and that whole night, I mean, I've always been intuitive. That whole night I was intuiting something was going to happen. And boy, was I right. Got home, walked into the house, totally ignored my parents because I just like energetically could feel that something was going to happen. I just kind of laid on my bed in my bedroom, and not soon thereafter, I think it was my dad that called me at the time and said, "We need to talk to you." So I knew that something was happening in that moment. So basically, moral of the story is that my parents ended up straight up asking me whether I was gay at the time. And I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just going back and forth into my mind as to whether I wanted to authentically answer that question. And keep in mind that this was like the best label that I had for myself at the time, label.
So you didn't understand the transgender term at that time?
No, not at that time. I graduated high school in 2006. So this probably would have been 2004, 2005.
Right.
Or no, it was earlier than that. In those early 2000 years, we'll put it that way.
And things hadn't really started to open up or change then either.
No, not at that time. For the trans community, I mean, depending on your perspective right now, things are moving forward and backtracking at the same time.
But it all opened up in 2012.
Yeah, I was going to say right around like 2010, 2015 is when things started to shift a little bit. But this was a decade prior to all of that.
Mhm.
And so that was my best understanding of myself at that time. You know, I knew that I had attraction to men essentially. And I had always known that since I was like 6 years old, 6, 7, maybe 8 years old. And of course, I had these like internal experiences of wanting to express my femininity, but not knowing that that was not safe. It felt safer at the time for me to come out as gay rather than, you know, simply come out as trans. That night that I was sitting there with my parents, coming out to them as quote unquote gay. First of all, historically, so my dad is a minister, as he was going through seminary, one of his best friends was a gay man who died of AIDS during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things that was kind of projected onto me like, you know, if you identify as gay, you're going to get AIDS. Like this isn't still early 2000s. For me now as a physician, I cannot even imagine that I experienced that or me as a parent or me as a physician telling telling a queer person like you're going to get AIDS because of your identity.
That's
So that
pretty harsh.
it's harsh. And another thing that I was told was you walk very femininely. You need to stop walking like that. Like people are going to know.
And they didn't want anybody to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had a secret to hide.
Right. So I think even though I wasn't acquainted, quote unquote, with the word trans or had knowledge of the transgender experience, even being told that I act too feminine. And I had been told my entire life growing up in like middle school, high school, that I was too feminine for somebody assigned male at birth. And so I think that forced me to repress that side of me.
Mhm.
Um, so it was multifactorial, I would say. But yeah, those years were difficult. One of my good friends is Matt Ashcroft. He is a Black gay man that lives in Canada. And he's a conversion therapy survivor. And I never put two and two together until I had met Matt. I mean, he and I have had different experiences, but I never put two and two together that I too went through a conversion therapy like experience. And whereas Matt went to like a formal conversion therapy camp, interestingly, in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which today is a very LGBT friendly area.
That's where Wendy grew up.
That's so funny. Wow.
I love New Hope.
It's a beautiful area.
All my gay friends are there, and I love them
Right.
all.
Exactly. So, yeah, Matt, I believe, experienced conversion therapy back in 2015 in New Hope. So it was, you know, even 10 years ago that was
Mhm.
happening there. So anyway, I say that to say that Matt and I's experience was very different, but growing up in the church and hearing narratives and sermons and Sunday school sessions about having same-sex attraction, let alone feeling that you're the opposite gender that you were born as, and hearing those narratives over the years, it's very toxic. It's toxic and traumatizing.
Well, and as a kid, you don't know how to understand that. Your parents, the church, their authority figures,
Right.
you kind of internalize that, don't you?
Oh, for sure.
Almost become a threat to you and
Yes. Yes.
your safety.
Yes. And that's one of the things that I can look back now. I was always the quiet kid. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to express myself because I was in that like container where I was totally boxed in. So I got to college and I did come out to friends in high school. And I mean, luckily in high school, I it's funny enough, one of my bullies in medical school turned out to be a lesbian. She and I became friends in high school. So but I had a really great group of friends in high school. I was in marching band, show choir, all the music ensembles, all the theater. Like, that container, being in music and theater, was very safe at that point in time, even in the early 2000s. Some of my teachers knew. So my high school experience was different, although I think what I began to feel around that time is that, like, okay, I have a little bit of a community that is accepting of me, but I have this church community that has these expectations. Then I have my friend group and LGBT community that has these expectations. And, I was just like, where am I? Where am I? Like, on an existential level in all of this.
So while you'd come out to your friends and some of the teachers knew, but your parents didn't, so that was all at the same time. You didn't come out
Yeah.
until junior year in high school,
Yeah.
right?
So that's the part I forgot to share. I ended up finding out that after I officially came out, my junior year of high school, I found out that one of my high school friends ended up telling my sister. We're 4 years apart. So my sister was about 11 or 12 years old at the time. She didn't understand what this whole gay thing meant. So she told my parents. Of course, I don't blame that on her. Like, she was just trying to protect me at the time.
She
So
was
that's
probably
how
trying to figure out what it was all about too.
exactly. That's basically what ended up happening. I was outed by a friend who then told my sister, and my sister told my parents. So, yeah.
Then how did that conversation go that evening? And that they picked prom night. Really?
Right, right. Yeah, that conversation was terrible. I was told I was going to get AIDS. I was told that I'm too feminine and I need to lock it down. And then beyond that, the years after that, my remaining high school years into even early college years, they were extraordinarily toxic with my family, to the point that we would get into harsh arguments with one another. Interestingly enough, my dad's the minister, but my mother is the one that's more like conservative, evangelical Christian. And she had books, from Focus on the Family and all these like conservative think tanks, so to speak. Focus on the Family was a big one back in the day. I mean, they still kind of are. And so just seeing those materials, and this is why I mentioned the conversion therapy piece, hearing these narratives continuously from the time that I was in middle school all the way through early college, that homosexuality is a sin, you're damned to hell. And then seeing my parents just reading articles that are, against how I'm feeling, where I wasn't put into an actual conversion therapy space. I would say it's kind of like conversion therapy light.
But you were in that environment where they never let up. They never accepted or were trying to help you with any of that. It was just this is the box you belong in. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I would say, I think my second year into medical school, I got an apology from my dad, which was big. I didn't, I was like, I'm going to just go through my life just dealing with this and not ever, like my parents having that aspect of my life so repressed inside of them that I would never hear that. And my dad apologized, basically for his complicity in allowing my mom to say a lot of the things that she did and not protecting me. When I initially heard that, I was just kind of dissociated a little bit, and I just didn't know how to handle it.
So what relationship do you have with them now?
I have a cautious relationship, I would say. They're not cut out of my life, but It's cautious, is how I'll put
You
it.
have boundaries.
I have boundaries. Yeah.
Well, then at some point, they thought you were gay all this time. So at some point, when you transitioned,
Right.
tell us about what happened then.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to say, now you're no longer gay.
Right, right. Never really was, but there we go.
That's right.
Um, so because I had that experience where I was outed without my consent in high school, because I was fairly prominent out on social media land, telling the world, hey, I'm trans. So I was like, and some of my dad's congregants I know follow me. So I was like, I need to get out in front of this before somebody says something to him. So as far as I'm aware, I got out in front of it. Yeah, so I sent my parents an email and I said, this is how it is. You can take it or leave it. And if you leave it, then these are the consequences. And I laid it all out on the table. I think that was probably my third year of medical school, second or third year.
And how did they respond to that?
I don't think they really responded. I mean, they responded, but you know what? Quite honestly, I haven't talked to them about that. Um, but they know the consequences if they don't fall in line, essentially. So that's kind of where things are at, I would say. So, like I said, I have a cautious relationship with my parents. But interestingly, I mean, my dad has had this huge evolution. My dad was never like strictly anti LGBT, even though he has this relationship with my mother who's more like conservatively minded. My grandmother's brother is gay. I never met him. He's since passed. So my dad grew up with his gay uncles from the time he was very young. My dad has this love of photography, and it was his gay uncles that gave him. My dad's a fairly good photographer too, that taught him those skills. And then his best friend in seminary was a gay man who unfortunately died of AIDS. And so my dad's known LGBT people since he came out of the womb, essentially. I just think that he kind of got lost in the dynamics of the church at the time, and certainly, just not standing up to my mother.
Plus
I
our
mean,
society as a
and
whole.
society, right? Yeah. So the conditions weren't good growing up, but
Here you are now. And
here
it
I
sounds like
am.
you set boundaries. That's what you were talking about. This is the manifesto that you said to them or whatever that is. And I don't know if you want to share some of the boundaries that you set, but are there suggestions that you would have for other people? Any kind of advice about setting boundaries like that?
I think in some ways you kind of have to set an ultimatum. I know people might have different perceptions of that, but that's essentially what I did with my parents. Like, if you want me to continue being in your life, then this is how you have to behave and this is how you have to treat me. Essentially telling my parents that their perception of me, being queer and trans, that is their job to work on themselves. That has nothing to do with me. So, yeah, you do have to put up hard boundaries, I think, sometimes.
Well, and you were expecting them to change their actions, but not necessarily to change their beliefs or their mental process. I mean, to me, I would probably like that if I were in your shoes, but your boundaries were about their actions, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was about their actions, but there was a year time span back in 2020. That was the beginning of my second year of medical school, where I kind of cut off my mom for almost a year, I would say, because I found out that she voted for Donald Trump. And I was like, you know what? I'm just like, this is not, if you as a parent do not recognize that the politicians you decide to put into office have the potential to harm your own children, then like, well, what does that say about you psychologically? It shows me that you are so psychologists call it confirmation bias. You are so locked into your own biases within your brain that you can't contend with anything that is antithetical to that.
There is a lot of that,
There is a lot of that.
younger kids who get thrown out of their homes and end up on the streets, no support at all.
What is going on within parents that they are so resistant to this? What happened to them in their life that they can't work through this in their own minds and hearts? That to me is evidence of their own suffering and really not a reflection on someone else's identity, on their child's identity.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Well, so who helped you through this? Who or what helped you get through? I mean, maybe high school, but at least, get through the transition when you were in medical school, I understand, right?
Right. Well, first of all, like I said, my community in high school was very good. I had a Spanish teacher in high school who was a lesbian. She was always super supportive. I would always kind of go to her classroom for counseling sessions at the end of school days, just to be around other queer people and queer adults at the time. Of course, in college, I majored in music in college. And so music and theater are always open to queer and trans people. The music and theater community has always been very open, like throughout the decades. So I was in a good environment there. Once I got to college and just dealing with the psychological burden of everything that I just explained, I began to have panic attacks. At the time, I didn't understand what a panic attack was. All I remember doing is calling my mom and saying to her, "Mom, I feel like I'm dying." If anybody's ever experienced a panic attack, you feel like your heart's going to beat out of your chest. You feel like you can't catch your breath. You feel jittery, like you've had 10 cups of coffee. And so, my mom at the time, she works in healthcare. She was like, "I think you're having a panic attack." So after experiencing a couple of those, I was like, I cannot live like this. This is not healthy. Who can live with continual panic attacks? This was probably in my junior year of college. So a couple years down the road from when I came out. And I just intuitively was drawn to the Eastern traditions because I had grown up in this like Western Christianity paradigm, and I wanted some spirituality that was antithetical to that. Like this religion did so much harm to me that I am now looking to the East and like what are their like philosophical and spiritual paradigms. I don't know if I would have expressed it that way back then, but that was like, okay, I need some way in order to make meaning of my experience.
I find this amazing because Methodist Church to the east, same for me. To the east, Zen.
Message to the Methodist Church.
How were you aware of even the Eastern traditions? Had you had friends who were into that, or?
No, I wasn't familiar. This was completely an intuitive thing that was like, I need to explore this thing.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, one of the first books that I read, it's probably sitting on the shelf back here. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh is a very well-known Vietnamese Zen master. His work is amazing. He passed away about 3 years ago, I think in January 2022. But he was a prolific Zen master, and I read his book called Living Buddha, Living Christ. So at the time, it was a nice kind of convergence between what I grew up, with Christianity and being curious about what is this Buddhism thing. And Thich Nhat Hanh just did such a massively beautiful job, really doing an amazing job of like comparing the similarities between the teachings of the Buddha and the teachings of Jesus. Whereas, if Christians actually behaved like their proclaimed savior, then maybe we wouldn't be where we are. But
Oh, God,
What a concept.
reading that book sent me down this path. And, now I have a million Thich Nhat Hanh books. And have explored Japanese Zen and explored yoga and just kind of explored it all, just taking in as much of this Eastern paradigm as possible, because really the Eastern way of knowing, the Eastern philosophy really is focused on like human liberation, providing a direct pathway for you to alleviate as much of your own suffering as you can in this lifetime. So I became wrapped up and kind of obsessed with, okay, what can I learn next? Which is why I've been on the journey I've been on.
And why you're still in medical school.
Correct.
So you were doing this, you got into the Eastern philosophies before you decided to transition then.
Yes, I had done a substantial amount of work and healing on myself through yoga, through meditating, which is a part of yoga. I had done that work probably for about a decade of my life. And maybe if I hadn't have done that work over that decade, maybe I would never have transitioned at this point.
This is a
But
lot of
that's,
mental work involved in the transition.
oh, for sure.
And then the meditation and everything is so incredibly powerful in that.
Yeah, this is one thing that I wish that our community had greater access to, because it's transformational. When there's deeper like cultural and spiritual wounding here, sometimes I don't think our Western paradigms of counseling can get at it.
Not nearly as effectively. A
And
lot of
when,
our traumas live in the subconscious,
Oh, for sure.
and the meditation is a way to begin to work on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
so then tell us about, you said you transitioned in medical school.
Yes.
You were doing the mental part, but actually the social and the physical part, was there a kind of a dividing line or some catalyst that you said, okay, this is what I have to do now? Or was it gradual? Tell us more about that part of the story.
Yeah, it certainly was gradual. I certainly had started to meet trans people prior to medical school, probably in the years between me finishing my undergrad and between medical school. So, like 2015s ish, the 20 teens, we'll say. I had started to meet trans people, and it was like, oh, this is kind of curious. And that would stay with me, but it honestly wasn't until I met a really dear friend, a trans woman of 30 plus years. My friend Trisha Carlisle, she won't mind me mentioning her name. She is just a freaking delight of a human being. She and I met on TikTok, I think in 2020. That was when some life circumstances for me were changing aside from identity, and I just kind of began to sit with things. And one of my good friends in medical school, I found out that she was beginning her transition at that time. And my friend and I were having active conversations at that time about gender. And so, I kind of did the whole, I would say like non-binary. And I'm not saying for, I understand that non-binary is an identity in and of itself, but for me, it was I don't want to use the word phase because that is a terrible word that's used. Like, oh, this is just going to be a phase. It's not. But for me, that non-binariness phase, I put that in quotations for people listening to the audio. Um, that was a time for me to kind of dip my toe in and see, how I felt expressing this way. So I still very actively had my beard at the time. Um, and, began to dress very gender incongruent or gender nonconforming. That whole process was liberating for me. It was like, okay, now I can finally express this femininity that has been like built up inside of me all of these years. Former male presenting me was totally guarded, totally soft spoken, timid. And now Stevie is, as I say, a boss bitch and just says whatever's on her mind.
Congratulations.
That's what I say to everybody. We change going through this. Our personalities blossom.
Yes. Yeah. That is very true.
And so people have said, oh, it takes so much courage to transition. Do you think of yourself as courageous? Do you think it takes courage to transition?
Courage isn't something that I don't know if that word's applicable. That word just doesn't resonate with me when I hear it.
Most people in LGBT come out to survive.
Right.
But I hear that from cis people. And you're not the first person
yeah.
we've talked to who said the same thing about courage.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
always find it interesting that people say, oh, must take so much courage. And they're not being nasty. They're just thinking that,
No.
wow, what would it take if I were to do that? And it would take courage. But how do you see it?
I don't know if it's courage necessarily. It's radical honesty
Ah,
or radical acceptance.
Of yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, is there courage in that? Yeah, maybe for some people, but yeah, to me, it's just kind of, you can stick any key basically in any keyhole, but it doesn't unlock the door.
Mm-hmm.
Just to make this into an LGBT aphorism, I suppose, many of us are kind of like walking through life. The key fits, but then, as you unfold and let go of whatever needs to be let go of for you to come into your authentic self, then you find the key that fits and actually unlocks the door.
Mm.
So that's kind of how I see it. I don't know if it's a courage thing. Yeah.
I've always said that the only time I feel the need for courage is to face other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
But that wasn't part of your coming out, was it?
No.
It was the survival piece. Yeah.
Right.
So you were in medical school. I mean, you
Yes.
still are, but you were in medical school in Arizona at the time. What was the reaction to the people around you?
As I was transitioning, suppose I built up this kind of persona on social media where I was like, no bullshit. And so honestly, other than like online trolls, people in real life did not really say anything. They didn't bother me. That's how I know that I've done the mental transition piece of it, not just like the physical, but I went from like this timid, scared, non-confrontational person to expressing myself and kind of unleashing the beast and not taking any BS.
Take no prisoners.
Correct. So honestly, as I think about it now, I'm like, who I am now is who I needed in my life when I was younger. Like I have become that person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty amazing to feel.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Other than this one woman who had transitioned 30 years ago, I think you said, was there another role model or someone who was the Stevie to the who you were before you were Stevie?
Yeah, funny enough, this is a little funny aside, I suppose. People used to call me Stevie when I was younger, and I hated it because I felt like being called that feminized me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have like officially reclaimed the name that I used to hate being called when I was younger.
Interesting. So you were talking about people in the transgender community having access to the things that you were talking about, that you went through and how important that is and the mental health part of that. You were talking about the Eastern philosophy.
Yes.
And I think you had said to us the other day that that's one of the things that you want to focus on once you've got your medical degree. You want to talk about that a little bit?
There is a tremendous need for paradigms beyond conventional medicine. And I'm not saying that to be against conventional medicine. Obviously, it's needed when it's needed, and trans people wouldn't be able to like physically transition without synthetic hormones. So that's amazing. And we wouldn't be able to get gender affirming surgeries and all of that without the marvels of modern medicine. But what I see dominantly in the queer and trans community is a deeply suffering community. When you compound all of these, it's been kind of outlined in public health research, particular scientific research, that Black and brown people, LGBT people, Indigenous people, people that are marginalized dominantly in our society in some capacity, walk through life with these what they call marginalized stressors. And there's a lot of research showing what the damage of marginalized stressors does and its impact on people over the long term. And I just don't think our conventional paradigm is like really getting to the root of that and really providing people with like actionable, sustainable tools to begin getting at all of those stressors that they face in their daily lives. There's a lot of substance use in our community, a lot of drug use in our community, a lot of maladaptive behaviors that just are not healthy in the long term. I want to approach my work from that perspective. That's kind of the essence of the Eastern philosophy, is like, how can we learn to hold space for our own suffering? Which, as you express that verbally, it might not sound so pleasant, and it's not pleasant, but people need to learn the tools in order to help process those things. You can see that this level of suffering exists just in the way that we within the community treat one another. And you just have to question like whether our existing model of healthcare is getting to that issue. And I don't think it is, unfortunately. So I think if queer and trans people can access holistic queer and trans affirming care, also with the integration of these Eastern practices and philosophy, I think that can offer a really powerful paradigm of healing that people just don't have access to because it's not covered by insurance, unfortunately.
I also found when I started my therapy, Stevie, that my therapist really focused on my thought patterns and my beliefs.
Right.
And that's not what a lot of people I've talked with in the community have gotten from their therapists. Our therapists in this country vary completely in terms of their training, their outlook, their social acceptance even. So I found working on meditations, shifting thought patterns, shifting beliefs really helped accelerate that whole transition and my own self-acceptance. And that combined with traditional therapy and support from the medical community made a world of difference when I transitioned in 2015 versus when I tried in 1970, 71. In that day, I was told by a psychiatrist, "You're a freak."
Right.
Period.
Right. Right. Yeah. So our community is living with that historical harm.
And when I started my transition and started meeting other transgender people, therapists were referred to as gatekeepers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to see one for, well, at the time that I started, it was a year, technically, before you could start hormone replacement therapy. That changed very quickly, and I started with informed consent, but
yeah.
When you talk about the way people in the community treat each other, what kind of things do you see?
Just very harmful, toxic dynamics. What we see through human behavior, I would say, in many circumstances, is that people perpetuate the harm of which they haven't dealt with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I say you got to feel it to heal it. And I think the other issue is that our world right now, through the internet, you can talk to anybody anywhere around the world. We are so like connected, but like fakely connected. So I often say that we're so connected, but we're really like disconnected from ourselves and from how we treat one another. And I think that's one of the principles of the Eastern traditions is non-harm, ahimsa. And that's not only like, how are you treating yourself, but how are you interrelating with other people? And I think a lot of times, because of the trauma that we experience as queer and trans individuals, if that's not healed, it often is perpetuated onto others in our community. It's unfortunate, but I understand why it exists.
Well, and with the religious part too, growing
For
up in that kind of an environment, we've interviewed other people who, one we talked to the other day, he said, thought he was going to go to hell because his
Yeah,
parents had that paradigm and struggled with that. So when you're a child and brought up in that environment, you internalize that, you think that that's the truth. But you
right,
know on a deeper level, what you're saying, that you knew on a deeper level there was something there. So how do you balance those two things and sort out, like you said, who am I?
right. I like embodiment-based practices or body somatic-based practices. You know, it may be a scientific mystery right now, but I think we carry trauma like in our physical body and in our
Mhm.
mind.
We store
And I,
the energy of it.
yeah, we store the energy of it. And that's actually a great way to put it, because the way that trauma happens from a psychological, neurological level is that in an ideal environment, you know, if, and this is a dumb scenario because it doesn't happen in modern times, but I think it facilitates my point, is like, if a tiger was chasing you, you would ideally be in a situation where you would run and flee from the tiger and you would get away. But what happens in trauma is that you're being chased by the tiger and you can't run away. So our body has okay, I'm going to get into a little science. Our body has something called the autonomic nervous system, which has two divisions. You have the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, which basically moves blood from your internal organs to your extremities, your arms and your legs, in order for you to run and flee from a situation. So all of your power, all the nutrients in your bloodstream are going to your muscles essentially, so that you can use that power and that energy to flee the situation. But what happens with trauma when it becomes embodied physically is we don't have that opportunity to flee the situation. So for me, growing up in the church, hearing those repetitive narratives that you're going to hell, this isn't right with God, you know, homosexuality is a sin, being transgender, blah, 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 blah. Those are repeated forms of trauma because there's that incongruency between what you're feeling inside and what is being projected upon you. So you're carrying, like Wendy said, the energy of that in your body. I think a lot of the goal of healing, when you're in a constant traumatic experience or what might be called post-traumatic stress, we're essentially frozen. Our nervous system is frozen in that sympathetic response, which is what we call the fight or flight response. So the goal of healing is to get our nervous system, and this is where trauma healing comes in, is to get our nervous system more on the parasympathetic response, which is the rest, digest, and healing response. And that's, I think, a major issue in our community, is that so many of us are still in that fight or flight mode. So we can't think clearly. I'm not blaming each other. I mean, at some point we have to accept some level of responsibility for our actions. But what I'm saying is those actions oftentimes are underpinned by this trauma that has been perpetuated, because we know that when somebody's in a perpetual state of trauma, another part of the brain is called the amygdala. The amygdala is your fear center of the brain. So if a tiger is chasing you, that's going to be the first thing to light up, is your amygdala. And then it's going to notify your autonomic nervous system, hey, it's time to run. So what we know is, like, through ongoing trauma and through ongoing chronic stress, your amygdala grows in size because it's constantly being fed information, essentially. What happens as a result of that is that it begins to erode the connections in your prefrontal cortex, which is your center for critical thinking. And so when you're in a constant fear response, you're not actually thinking about like, what harm am I causing other people? You can't think through that clearly. So to get people to breathe, to meditate, to get into that parasympathetic response, that relaxation response, and then to teach them how to continually return to that place of peace, of ease, of relaxation, and that space of safety is incredibly important as they move through their healing journey. So that's how you can begin shifting the experience within their nervous system. I think so many in our community need that level of healing that's just not going to always happen through talk therapy.
Yeah, the image I get when you're talking about that is that somebody just keeps hitting you and hitting you and hitting you, on a physical level, and you
Yeah.
never know when you're going to get hit. So
Yes.
that just keeps building up. And the
Yeah.
other thing you said, which I thought was fascinating, is about the amygdala growing. So when our political, I won't call them leaders, but when the politicians start throwing, oh, you got to be afraid of transgender people, you got to be afraid of immigrants,
Yes.
they're throwing that at you.
Correct.
That's going to increase the size of that amygdala, which then cuts down on the critical thinking.
Correct.
And then on both sides of this, on the side that's getting all the misinformation and BS from the politicians and the religious people, and in the community itself, hearing all this stuff thrust on them, both sides are in perpetual trauma.
Mhm.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
The whole
And
world can use what you're talking about.
and you don't have to hear all those things being said to you all the time. You store them in your brain and you can replay those thoughts
Yeah.
anytime you want to and have that same feeling as if it were actually being dumped on you in real life. You can trigger it yourself.
What you're thinking of as the default mode network, as we call it, the DMN. Yes. The default mode network is where like a lot of our ruminating thoughts.
Yeah, that little voice that talks to us all day long.
Correct. Correct. So with this Eastern philosophy, and especially when you learn like meditation techniques, like learning to find space-ish, space and a little bit of distance from that default mode network, from that voice that is continually perpetual
And
in your mind.
learning to shift the thoughts that little voice tells you all the time, change them to be more supportive instead.
Right, right. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work. Well, I'm glad that you're getting ready to do it, that you've been doing it, and that you're helping the community. And it helps everybody, Stevie.
Yeah,
What you're doing hopefully has ripple effects.
I hope so. Yes.
So let me ask you a strange question. So living the life that you've lived and as a transgender person, how has that changed your understanding of what it's like to be human?
That's a deep existential question.
You're up for it, I know.
I guess what's on my mind right now is it makes you more human. It gets you in touch with a level of humanity that unfortunately the world cannot contend with right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just, this goes back to like everybody's so disconnected.
Yeah.
Like if we all sat down, like Wendy's talking about, and felt what it is we're actually feeling, then maybe white supremacy wouldn't exist. Maybe all these like toxic paradigms of harm in the world would not exist, because we would be so in tune with the harm that we're causing that it would not be occurring in the first place.
But what we might realize is that while we're disconnected on a certain level, our energy is still all connected.
Oh, for
So
sure.
we're feeling all these things that are going on.
Yeah.
But up here, we're only connected on our social media or whatever. But what you're talking about, the body work,
Yeah.
all that's affecting all of us. The negativity, the fear, even though we try to hold the space that we hold and do the things that we can do,
Right.
you just feel that going on all
Yeah.
over the world. So, if we
Right.
could heal some of that, one person at a time, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what I would say is like, given everything happening in the world, people perceive it to be, as you were saying earlier, this courageous thing to transition. But trans people are simply aligning themselves with their humanity. That's what all of us should be doing.
Mhm.
And you don't have to be transgender or gay or lesbian or whatever. But whatever it is that's blocking you from your own inner truth needs to be overcome, not only for yourself, but for the benefit of others. Your liberation affects the liberation of your community. You might describe that as God or collective consciousness or whatever you want to label it as. But as your mind evolves and shifts, so does the larger mind shift.
So what surprises you most about your life so far?
In regards to transitioning or just in general?
In general.
I am proud that I've become the person that I needed when I was younger.
Congratulations. Yes.
Yeah.
What a wonderful thing, to be at the age that you're at and to have found the true you or unveiled. I get the image I get is of the sculpture, wasn't it, David? You chip away everything that's not David.
Right.
So
Yes.
you chipped away and are chipping away everything that's not Stevie.
Correct. Correct.
Just what a wonderful thing to reveal that.
And I love that you have embraced the name that you hated.
Right.
I love it. That's great.
Tell us about your podcast, because you've got a fabulous podcast, and you were talking to us about monetizing that, raising funds for these things that you're hoping to do. So tell our audience
So
about
this
that.
this is my podcast right here. Queer Storytime, the podcast. I started Queer Storytime not in its current form back in, I believe, April of 2021. My first guest back then was my friend Trisha Carlisle. So that started originally on Instagram, just as like Instagram lives. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then that's when I started transitioning into like general medicine classes, which are some of the hardest classes that you take in medical school. So I knew that I could not do that as often as I was doing it. So in that year that I was not doing Queer Storytime, I just kept kind of reflecting and thinking, I want to make this bigger than it is just on Instagram. So it took me probably a year and a half beyond when I had originally stopped it to restart it. National Coming Out Day, October 11th, 2023. I officially started it as a podcast that has an audio only version, and it has a YouTube channel. So there's audio visual. And so I say that Queer Storytime is a space of radical affirmation, acceptance, empowerment, and healing. And through that, I want people to share their stories of how they have come into their own humanity and how they've accepted who they are. I just released episode 24. I have the intention to release bi-weekly, but just with the realities of medical school, sometimes that doesn't always happen. So I look forward to growing the podcast, and I've had several amazing guests on. Wendy's about to be a future guest. So you'll see her on there at some point. And yeah, back to your question about the kind of healing work. One of the things that I've witnessed, one of the factors I think in our community, unfortunately, when you're a part of a marginalized community, is that you don't have access to a lot of what the cisgender community has access to. It's certainly, you can argue that gay men within our community have the most privilege of anybody within the community just because they're a man in society. But
Well,
go
they were
ahead.
also accepted.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
way back, that they had their psychological diagnosis removed in 1973. It took time and a lot of struggle and everything for them to gain acceptance, but a lot of the things that they've told me is what you and I are doing.
Yeah.
Being out, being visible, and speaking to people in society. That is what they tell me change things for the gay community.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. Yeah, still, gay men are still stigmatized in society,
Oh,
even
yeah.
though, in
But
comparison to other people within our community, they
not
have.
quite as bad as we are.
Oh, correct. My point in saying this is that the more marginalized you become, the less access you have to financial resources, to jobs, to like things to meet your basic needs. And that is a massive, massive, massive issue for the LGBT community, unfortunately. And so one of my goals that I'm kind of working on this year to start it in a small way is I'm trying to start a mutual aid network where people make donations so that those of us that don't have access to finances or whatever the case may be, that they would be able to receive access to holistic queer and trans affirming care, which would be offered by me and perhaps other people that decide to come on board with this, because I can't do it by myself. But mutual aid is a huge aspect of the LGBT movement. When you have government after you, when you have dominant society and culture after you, like, we are the ones that have to save ourselves. And of course, we have amazing allies like Lynn and others and all of that, but we also can't put that on just our allies. We have to be able to take responsibility for ourselves to some degree. That's just the reality of being a marginalized person in society.
And we have to create more allies because we can't rely on just the ones we have, like Lynn.
Correct.
Well, and I hope that's what we're doing here.
Yes. Yeah. So if anybody's interested in this, please let me know. This is just, it's kind of boots on the ground type thing, but I do want to start collecting funds to be able to offer this care to people that could utilize it.
So how would you like people to contact you?
Yeah, so people can email me at Queer Storytime, the podcast. And there's a website called Give Butter, I believe. And they're a fundraising organization for nonprofits and mutual aids and all of that. And so I have a page there, and I'm calling it the Rainbow Fund 2025. And I'm seeking to raise $5,000 to start, to begin working with people that wouldn't otherwise be able to access these services. Give Butter / Rainbow Care Fund 2025.
Okay. Stevie, this has been wonderful today. Do you have any last bits of wisdom that you can share with our audience today?
Do your healing work.
Very important.
And if you can't do it yourself, ask for help.
Yeah, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Stevie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then thank you to our audience for joining us today. This has been another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Stevie Inghram has been our fabulous guest today, a soon-to-be, newly minted naturopathic physician. And let us know when that happens so we can put that on our website and we can congratulate you and we can help celebrate with you.
Y'all are welcome to come to my graduation.
So thanks to our audience for being here. I'm Lynn Murphy, one of your hosts. Wendy Cole is your other host. And remember to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. We have fabulous episodes coming up. And give us a like. Subscribe, like, rate, review, all those things. YouTube and any of your podcasts. And be sure when you do subscribe, you'll get notified so that next time you won't miss another episode. So thanks for being here today, and we will see you on the next episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.